Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us at our Research Coordinator Enrichment Series, a monthly series. Today's topic, as you can see on the front slide, navigating the clinical research study activation process. We have presenting with us Mike Jacklin. He is a Research Quality Assurance Manager Operations at the MCW Cancer Center Clinical Trials Office. So he'll be providing from the perspective of the process in the Cancer Center, the MCW Cancer Center, be presenting a high-level overview of the clinical research study activation process, key steps, coordination points from moving a study from initial concept to full activation. And then next month, I believe it's on the 25th, the last Thursday of the month, the numeric date, I'm not sure. I think it is the 25th. So next month we have a guide to key research systems that our staff use at MCW. So I'm going to drop in a couple minutes, I'll drop in the chat the box link for today, which has today's presentation and all of our past presentations as well. And then also a link to the CTSI Academy website, which you probably all have been on a few times, where you can sign up for next month's training. I think that's everything. I'm going to pass it over to Mike.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sarah. So, yeah, as Sarah said, I'm Mike Jacklin, Operations Manager in the Cancer Center Clinical Trials Office. First of all, thank you for having me. Thanks to CTSI and for hosting and allowing me this time to show you how we kind of go through our study activation process in the Cancer Center. This is a little bit of a broader presentation. I see some names that I recognize from our Cancer Center. This may come as no surprise to you guys, but for others, I tried to keep this pretty high level and just explain the whole process. So we will get into that in a little bit. I just wanted to take 1 minute to introduce myself. I've been with the Cancer Center CTO for about 12 years now in various roles, just kind of working my way through as a clinical research coordinator for a number of years. And then we started our central operations team in the office in about 2021. And since then have just been growing and building some of these processes out, growing the team as well with a couple of dedicated activation specialists now. And as of January of this year, we're pretty much full steam ahead with our clinical trials activation team. So that's kind of that's who I am, and that's the scope of the discussion today. This is going to be pretty informal, I think, so feel free to interrupt with questions. And I know, Sarah, you're monitoring the chat if you have questions throughout. Thank you, Sarah. If you have questions throughout, just you can put them in the chat or feel free to raise your hand or interrupt me as we go. Next slide, please, Sarah. All right, so this is a high-level overview of our study startup process. There's really 6 main steps here that have a variety of different teams who are involved in completing them. And we will start, I often get questions, and it's a little ambiguous about how we even get a clinical trial concept or protocol in the first place. So we'll start there with the research manager, and you can go to the next slide. So there's really not much to say on this step. It's the initial receipt of a new study or concept. So you can see a new study can come to the CTO through a variety of means. There's no real definition. This talk is also geared towards a lot of our industry studies. So I just put a couple of notes on the bottom here, but usually we would receive a study or protocol or concept even by the principal investigator, who is the physician who is interested in being the head of the study at our site. Or it can come directly to a disease team manager. We do have some other initiatives for, partnerships with certain pharmaceutical companies, certain other investigators at other sites. So a protocol can really come to us through any means. But down below here, I just had a couple of notes. So sponsor-initiated trials will be brought to the DOT by the PI. We'll get into what a DOT is in the next slides, but investigator-initiated trials are an exception to this. So those are developed from concept to final protocol. internally, usually, and in coordination with the PI and our IIT steering committee. So that's a talk for another day, but that's how most of our trials are brought to us. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. So as I said, once we receive that protocol, it's going to proceed to our disease-oriented team for approval. Next slide. And just a high-level overview of what our integrated disease-oriented team is. So the purpose of we call them the IDOT or IDOT. The purpose of those is it serves as a forum to enhance coordination of patient care and clinical research. IDOTs are disease or discipline-specific groups composed of faculty from all relevant treatment modalities and disciplines, clinical staff and research staff. As far as the structure of the DOT, they're led by a physician chair and vice chair, including membership roster reflecting relevant disciplines. For example, our thoracic DOT would have thoracic physicians. The DOT voting members consist of faculty investigators, both MDs and PhDs, as well as the CTO disease team manager who supports that DOT. They include voting representatives from all relevant modalities, and this is their primary responsibility is the approval of new protocols through this voting. So they're responsible for actively managing the whole clinical trial portfolio that meets the needs of the cancer center's patient population and catchment area, and advancing the research goals of the cancer center. So that's kind of their mission statement and the primary purpose of the DOT, but this is really the first step in bringing a trial through activation is going to be the approval of the DOT group. And you can go to the next slide, Sarah. I just had a quick list of all of our DOTs at MCW, so you can see each one is broken down by specialty. And that's where I had mentioned before, where all the physicians of that specialty will meet and review all of the trials for interest, feasibility, funding, and all of that kind of stuff. So they discuss that, the study is brought to the DOT, they vote and approve it, and then it moves on to the next step. So you can go to the next slide. So speaking of our next step, once it is DOT approved, it's going to go to our study activation team. So this is really where my team first receives the study and where we fully start onboarding a new clinical trial. Next slide. So this slide the next two slides are a little bit busy. There's quite a bit that goes into our operational assessment here. But we do have what we call an operational assessment review. This has been in place for a number of years now as part of kind of our operations team and study activation team primary initiative and mission. So this starts once a study is ready to proceed to startup. So it's going to be approved by the DOT. We will have a confidentiality disclosure agreement in place with the sponsor to share the protocol. And then the sponsor has selected our site to proceed. So those are kind of our three checks to make sure that the study is ready to proceed. But once we have all of that, it's submitted to our activation team and it's brought to this operational assessment review. So I'll be calling that the OAR from now on. There's a lot of acronyms. I'll try to define them as we go, but there's a lot of different committees and groups that review this stuff. But the OAR, so this is our operations group. It's a committee to review new studies that are submitted for operational feasibility and planning during the startup process. Members include the disease team manager. They're the ones who will act or who will manage the study once it's open. But they're involved in the beginning too, just to have eyes on it as it goes through activation. So the disease team manager will be there. Our IDS pharmacist who is assigned to that disease group will be there. Freighter outpatient nurse coordinators, CTO lab, and CTO activation team. We do invite other departments as applicable. So we will invite OCRIC, which is the Clinical Research Compliance Office at Freighter, Nuke Med, Cell Therapy Lab. If there are other groups that this study may impact that don't often do research or don't may not do research, have any processes in place for how to manage a research trial, we'll invite them to this meeting to kind of speak on any operational challenges that we may identify during the meeting. And the OER meeting occurs twice a month, so it's on the first and third Wednesday of each month with a max of 5 studies reviewed. So as an idea of our volume of new studies in the Cancer Center, we rarely get 5 studies per meeting. So I'd say we're anywhere around 5 studies total, 5 to 7 studies per month that are coming to our OER meetings. So the protocols and associated documents, which I'll get into right below there, those are reviewed by the committee to ensure that all outstanding operational concerns are resolved by the time of study activation. And that's kind of the main purpose of the entire operational assessment review. This is the first time that the study will be seen by the activation team, by our Freighter partners, so IDS Pharmacy, Freighter Outpatient Nursing, those other departments that may be impacted, and our Research Compliance Office. This is the first time that everybody's looking at the trial. So we will share the protocol with them. We'll share any pharmacy manuals or lab manuals to look at. Those are all centrally located in Florence eBinder's system. So they all have access to those. And we get about 2 weeks for all of those groups to review the new trial and complete the operational assessment tool, which will be on the next slide. But we get about 2 weeks for everybody to do independent operational reviews for their departments. And then at the operational assessment review is when we review everybody's comments and discuss and kind of work through any barriers that we see to operations or enrollment or even getting the study open. And then any other departments that we may need to notify or do operational planning with outside of our normal means. So it's kind of a catch-all to identify any operational challenges that we anticipate. Sarah, you can go to the next slide. All right, so this is an overview of our OER process, a little bit of what I just talked about, but once the study is received by the activation team, it's added to the next available agenda. Usually that's 2 to 4 weeks ahead of time, depending on volume. And then work begins on the budget and clinical trial agreement, as well as regulatory startup procedures. So I will break this down by each of those groups to tell you what they're all doing during activation. But again, this is the submission to the OER group is the first time that all of these different groups are seeing the trial. So this is kind of our informal clock start, where we would expect people to intake the study at that point and begin work on the budget, the clinical trial agreement, IRB submission, and any of our other activation procedures. So the activation team is going to upload all of the required documents. That includes the protocol, any manuals that the sponsor has. What else? Like material safety data sheets, investigator brochures. There's a number of required documents that we have. And the purpose of requiring those up front of the study sponsor is that it really limits our ability to plan operationally if we don't have these manuals. And we have found in the past that without that hard requirement of those manuals, we would not get them in timely fashions, just historically. So we do use that as a benchmark for allowing the study to proceed in activation. We need all the information that the sponsor has in order to start. So that's our trigger then for the budget team and regulatory team and the activation team to start. The CTO activation team, along with the other members of the OER listed before, review the protocol for operational planning and complete their applicable sections of the tool. So the OAT, that's our operational assessment tool. It's a comprehensive summary of the clinical trial operational plan, including locations of care, treatment plan builds, required nursing assessments, study drug management and supply, central lab and tissue processing, and a lot of other one-off planning like complex coordination between different departments on the same day, observation periods and where that's going to happen, who's going to be responsible for some of the research assessments that are included in this trial. There's a large number of things that we plan for up front. The OAT is about 13 pages, I think now. So there's quite a bit of operational planning that goes into it. So that is during the 2 weeks preceding the OAR meeting. Once the OAR meeting occurs and during it, any questions or areas that need more discussion are highlighted and addressed by the parties present. So it's a good opportunity to get all of those people together up front to discuss any operational challenges they had, figure out if we have any outstanding questions for other departments or the study sponsor as well. So there are often a lot of protocols that do not list things very clearly, or there's things listed that do not follow our standard of care that we might want to discuss as a group with our pharmacists and with nursing. And this is really our opportunity to work through some of those issues up front so we don't get stuck with them later on. And it can also kind of inform some of our other teams that we'll get into on how they should be building their tasks as well. Sarah, you can go to the next slide, please. This next slide will just be some examples, and it is a little bit small, so I apologize for that. But this is some snapshots of our operational assessment tool, so you can see kind of what it looks like and what we're asking for. So on the left there is the title page. It's got all of the protocol information, including what version number we're on, who's the PI, who's the research manager, what parts of the study we're participating in, which is important for some of our earlier phase trials that, for instance, might have a dose escalation and then dose expansion portion. We really want to know if we're only going to be participating in dose expansion or both, because there can be a lot of operational planning to both of those parts. And if we're not participating in one, we want to know that up front so we don't spend all our time planning for a part of the study that we're not going to participate in. Below that is our documents list. So this lists in the table every document that we received from the sponsor, along with the version number and version date. Not all of them are required for all studies, but typically for our industry-sponsored studies in the Cancer Center, we're going to have manuals for everything and the protocol as well. So we do list the version date in there, and we will update this in real time if we receive new versions of any of these documents throughout activation. And this just ensures that everybody knows that we're all working on the same protocol version date, and there's some accountability for that version date in here. And then right below that, this is also in the beginning of the tool, we'll have just kind of a history, a version history of the tool itself, because this is a live document throughout the life of the study. We want to make sure that we are documenting who's making changes to it and when and what those changes were. So we have the date, a brief description of the changes that were made, and then a spot to put your initials if you've changed the tool. So we can look at accountability that way, and then any changes that are done are highlighted in the tool to make sure that people know anything that has occurred since we all met as a group. Since we know that things changed for a study during activation. So this is kind of our one-stop shop to make sure we've accounted for all those changes and everybody's aware of the plan. On the right is just an example of one of the sections. This is the first one. It just lists out all of our locations of treatment, so we know what departments are going to be involved and what is going to be asked of each of those departments. So we get into where the treatment will take place, if we're doing community sites, or if it's going to only be at the main cancer center and Freighter Hospital. We break down the protocol schedule of events and list each task that's going to be done. So we will identify which cancer center clinic is going to be seeing these patients. if we're going to go to the translational research unit or a day hospital, or if this is outpatient, inpatient. And then we do the same thing for the community sites if identified. So listing out specifics. So we do get pretty granular in this tool and try to account for every operational plan for the study. So we do get to the same level of detail in almost all the sections. Next slide, please. So we are informally on the clock right now for activation, having received the study to the activation team, and we're proceeding with OAR. The next step is the submission to the scientific review committee. So you can go to the next slide. Just really briefly, the scientific review committee reviews all cancer-related studies to ensure that they are scientifically sound and feasible. SRC is composed of physicians, nurses, biostatisticians, and pharmacists, providing a range of expertise for it. And then the key point for our purposes in clinical trial activation is that the submission of a new study to the SRC is the clock start date. So this is our official date that our time to activation has started. So we already have, as you can see, a couple of things in motion at this point. Internally, all of our groups have seen the study already. So by the time it is submitted and we're now on the clock, it's already going to be in motion. But that's the important thing for the SRC. We do have a central tracker that the activation team and the SRC team use to make sure that we are in alignment with our new studies coming up. So they'll be submitted to the OAR first, and we add them to that tracker. And then the SRC is reviewing those new studies that are coming for ones to review at the next SRC meeting. So we try to keep it in line so that we're reviewing the study for operations around the time that it's being submitted to the SRC. Typically, it might be a little before that we start reviewing operations, and that's ideal so that we get a little bit more time to get this rolling by the time it goes to the SRC. But again, the official clock start is that SRC submission. Next slide, sir. I might pause here for questions if there are any, because we're about to get into each group and what they're doing in activation. So this basically right now we've got the study approved and it's submitted and it's been approved by the SRC, which is our formal approval of the project to move forward.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So at this point, have the teams that would be officially taking over the study, like the coordinators and the nurses, have those people seen the study and are aware it's in process?
They are aware. So part of it that I didn't get into a lot, I think in the next couple of slides I'll touch on it, but we are using Encore financials, which requires an Encore calendar to be built to start a lot of our work. That review, the initial review of the calendar actually still lies with our disease team. So that's going to be the coordinators and the disease team manager. They take a first pass at that calendar to make sure it matches up with the protocol schedule of events. So the coordinators are aware of it, at least the primary coordinator.
Okay.
And then the disease team manager is aware because they're the ones who brought it to us from the DOT.
Gotcha. This is very different than study startup in other places. And so I'm just trying to get a sense of your flow and who's all involved where. So this is very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And again, this is as of January this year that our activation team is fully up and running. So this used to rely on the coordinators to be moving this along until we had this central team.
I bet they're glad to have the activation team.
I hope so. That's why we're here. Any other questions?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay. Sounds good. I think we can proceed then. So again, just to highlight where we are in the process now, our clock has just started and we'll go break down each group's tasks. Sorry, I don't know if for you guys the transition is a little slow, but I'm not
Yeah,
pausing.
it's
on
like a
purpose.
fade in, fade out delay. I don't know if
Okay.
I've seen it like that before, but it's working.
I just wanted to make sure I'm not the only one who saw that.
Yep, I see
All right,
it.
no problem. Okay. So we'll start with our regulatory startup procedures. We're gonna go through each slide and break down each team. But just starting with reg. So our CTO regulatory team is first notified of the new study via that submission to OAR and the activation team. So again, that's their clock start, their formal notice that they can begin work. So upon notice of the new study, the CTO regulatory team begins startup procedures, including, and of course, but not limited to, drafting the informed consent form. Again, this is mostly for our industry studies where we have a pharmaceutical sponsor. There's a lot of negotiation that happens in the consent form drafting, and this is when that starts. So we'll draft based on the sponsor's template as far as coverage analysis, but we'll put it onto our own cancer center template and then start negotiations with the sponsor. For investigator-initiated trials and cooperative group trials, it's a little bit more straightforward. For IITs, we're drafting the whole ICF ourselves, and then there's no negotiation, obviously, in those ones. And then for cooperative group studies, there's very little that we can actually change on their consent form. So we tend to just accept those as is and just put in some of our site-specific language in that ICF. So those ones are a little bit quicker. But ICF negotiation with study sponsors can last a little bit of time. So this is where we want our regulatory team to be assigned and start working on this consent form right away. While they're doing that, by the time they have an agreed upon consent form, we're usually ready to proceed with our IRB submission. So they will complete that submission via eBridge, and then the PI will submit to the IRB. The reg coordinator is then responsible for monitoring the review and approvals of ancillary groups, so radiation safety, institutional biosafety committee, or others that the study may be impacting. So they all have to review and approve it. Once that approval is in place from all of our ancillary groups, it'll proceed to the IRB. So once that happens, the reg coordinator is still responsible for monitoring the comments and queries from the IRB as it relates to the submission of the project. And then upon IRB approval, the CTO regulatory team uploads all of the essential study documents, including financial disclosure forms, the FDA form 1572, DOA logs. All of those essential study documents are uploaded to Florence, which is our central application for managing all of those documents. They will be routed for final signatures via Florence too. And then the final step is the regulatory manager signs off on the study following IRB approval and completion of those post-approval procedures, which is our indication that from a regulatory perspective, the study is now ready to open. You can go to the next slide. All right, so then that one went much quicker. So the next group is our budget and contract. So their startup procedures are a little more in-depth, I think. At least we work much more closely in alignment with our budget and contract than with our reg group. But just to get into it a little bit here, so the CTO pre-award finance team is first notified of a new study similar to the regulatory team. That is the submission to OAR. Since the implementation of Encore financials, as I mentioned before, the CTO pre-award team requires the Encore calendar to be available prior to any budget negotiations beginning. Ordering the Encore calendar is the responsibility of the CTO activation team. And then, as I said before, the study team is responsible for the first eyes on the calendar, and they're only reviewing it against the schedule of events in the protocol. The calendar ordering often happens even before the study is submitted to the OAR, just to give you an idea of the timeframes here. As soon as we have DOT approval, site selection by the study sponsor, and we have that CDA in place that we could share the protocol, that's when we're ordering the Encore calendar. It's kind of a risk reward system at that point. The number of studies that get abandoned after this point and we waste that calendar is such that it's worth it to order the calendar. Because for the vast majority, if it gets to this point in activation, we're going to be moving forward with the study. So again, with calendars cost money, but we need that calendar in place in order for our other teams to start work. So it really is one of the first things that we do in our current process. So then once the calendar is available and completed by the CTO study team, that's when the pre-award team proceeds with the development of the Encore billing grid, and they begin budget negotiation with the study sponsor. Again, this is geared towards our industry-sponsored studies, which is the majority of them. But the billing grid development and Medicare coverage analysis occur in parallel with budget negotiations. So again, just a little mention there about parallel processes. Wherever we can, we are pushing for parallel processes instead of sequential, since that saves a lot of time. It does increase the amount of coordination and communication that we need through the process. But it is worth it, because otherwise, if we're going sequentially, it as you know, would take a lot of time. So once the billing grid is complete, the CTO finance coordinator signs off on the coverage analysis portion of the calendar. They do that via Encore, and the calendar is now ready to be submitted to Freightart's Office of Clinical Research and Innovative Care Compliance, or OCRIC. So once the budget is fully negotiated, again, the budget is in process while the billing grid is being developed, but typically the budget negotiation is continuing past the time when we have the calendar done. But once the budget is fully negotiated, the clinical trial agreement can be negotiated between the study sponsor and MCW Grants and Contracts Office. Work on the contract must occur after the budget is fully negotiated. So these processes do not occur in parallel at the moment. That's another thing that I wanted to call out there, what we can and can't do at the same time. And after the clinical trial agreement is signed and executed between the study sponsor and our Grants and Contracts Office, from a financial perspective, the study is now ready to open. So we'd have 2 check marks now that we are ready to open. And you can go to the next slide, Sarah.
That was really slow.
Okay.
I can see it now.
Now we come to our CTO activation team startup procedures. So we've been working on the study since that DOT approval and calendar ordering and OAR, but there's a few things in addition to the OAR. So the CTO activation team is responsible for submitting the project to OCRIC, which again is the Freightart's Research Compliance Office, for administrative approval. There's 3 things typically that are necessary for submission of the new project to OCRIC. So we need that completed IRB submission by the regulatory team. We need the completed coverage analysis sign off on the Encore calendar by the pre-award team. And then we need a completed OAT by the CTO activation team. Again, that's the operational assessment tool, that 13-page document that I talked about a little earlier. So those are kind of the 3 check marks that everything's ready to go to compliance. The CTO activation team works with the assigned OCRIC nurse consultant to resolve any identified issues with the projects, examples including discrepancies in the coverage analysis console or Encore calendar, challenges in the operational plan or locations of care, misalignment of the MCA with the informed consent form. There are many other areas that we could run into complications in obtaining approval from OCRIC. So that responsibility lies with the CTO activation team to work through those. We work very closely with our budget team and regulatory team in resolving these as well. So if we do need to align the consent form with changes to the calendar or coverage analysis, we'll make sure that the reg coordinator and budget coordinator are both involved in those discussions so that we can make sure it's all in alignment and it all agrees. And OCRIC and the CTO activation team are kind of the ones who are centrally responsible for kind of moving that through to administrative approval. And then upon resolving all outstanding issues, the OCRIC nurse consultant will proceed with administrative approval of the project. Once that happens, from an operational perspective, now the study is ready to open. So now we've hit 3 check marks. We've got our regulatory IRB approval and post-approval complete. We've got the budget and contract negotiated and executed, and we've got OCRIC administrative approval from the hospital. So you can go to the next slide, Sarah.
I did have one question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
I actually missed it. It was a couple minutes ago. The question is, any recommendations on how to make the ICF negation process go smoothly? I've seen it take a lot of back and forth with our IRB and sponsors.
Yeah, certainly it can be difficult. And it kind of is sponsor dependent, I would say, on how difficult it is. So one thing that we're currently exploring is some agreed upon master consent form templates with a particular study sponsor, which can really help if we're not trying to renegotiate any of the safety or injury language in the consent form, for example. That is something it's kind of a heavy lift to get that done. It requires a lot of negotiation and agreement between the two up front. But if it is a sponsor that you work with a lot, it might be worth it to explore that option. But otherwise, I think that's probably what we've seen the most success with. But otherwise, it's just continuously following up with the study sponsor. We do involve our PIs in the discussion quickly too, if we find we're running into disagreements on some of that black language. We'll get the PI involved and then just have direct conversations with the IRB representative as well. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer beyond that. It is kind of a struggle every time. Okay, so then the last step here is our CTO beacon preparation. Now this kind of occurs in parallel to all of the other processes. The CTO beacon team begins drafting the treatment plans and order sets that are going to be implemented in Epic. But this is something that we need before the first patient is enrolled and started on treatment, obviously. So this is kind of one of our steps in activation that we've brought into the activation team to monitor. But the process in general is that the initial builds are independently reviewed by the study team. So that's the CRC at this point. So they're coming in a little bit later in the process, but this is another place where the research coordinator is going to be involved during startup. And then the other one is the IDS pharmacist. So once the review is complete, a meeting is scheduled to review any issues or questions that might require discussion. The meeting includes the study team, the nursing team, the pharmacist, and the CTO beacon coordinator. And then once that review meeting is complete and all outstanding items are addressed, the beacon team submits the build proposals to the Freighter beacon team, who builds the plans and pushes them to production in Epic. So as a time frame here too, the meeting scheduling takes about at least 2 weeks they need to review those documents. It can take a little bit longer to get those documents built in the first place, but the idea here is that we have this beacon meeting scheduled kind of within a month after our OAR meeting is the ultimate target. Now, right now, we are a little bit behind that, but that's kind of what we're targeting so that all these treatment plans are in place by the time the study opens. And then once the treatment plans are in production from the beacon perspective, the study is ready to open. So you can go to the next slide. So if you're looking at high level, we've got our 4 checkpoints here for those simultaneous submissions and approval. So we have IRB, OCRIC, budget and contract, and beacon done. Which brings us to the last step here. So you can go to the next slide. Again, not a ton to say about opening the trial, but at this point we are ready to activate. So in order for the activation team to proceed with opening the trial to enrollment, all the previous tasks must be complete, of course. And then the CTO activation team monitors a centralized dashboard application to track each group's progress. This is kind of how we have oversight of all of these different elements and procedures going on. Because as you can imagine, it's a lot. And each one of these I just hit at a high level. So there's many granular steps underneath that we have to track and make sure that we're hitting timelines on. So that central dashboard is really essential for the activation team and myself to be monitoring all those groups. So everybody has high visibility in there. They're entering data for completion dates. And then you can enter comments that you have any questions or anything, or if you're running into issues, you can enter comments in there too that the entire team can see. And then just once everything is in place, all of our agreements are in place, the CTO activation team will hand off the project back to the disease team manager, and they will open it to enrollment. So you can go to the next slide. So this is activation team initiatives, future direction. Just kind of wrap this up pretty quickly here, but the CTO activation team has a number of initiatives in place with the goal ultimately of reducing our overall time to activation. Reducing time to activation ultimately leads to more open studies and higher patient enrollment, which is a mission of the Cancer Center overall. So this is how we are contributing to that. So some of our current activation initiatives include the development and deployment of the web-based activation dashboard, which I had briefly mentioned before. This increases tracking and accountability of activation tasks. Each team is responsible for inputting their own data to track those steps, where they are with the IRB submission for the regulatory team, for example, or what difficulties we're encountering in the budget negotiations for the budget team. It's kind of a place where you can document everything visibly, and our PIs will have access to this too, so they can see kind of a snapshot of where the study is and what we might be having trouble with in getting towards activation. And then the CTO operations manager would be responsible for monitoring that overall progress. We also have bi-monthly reviews of the entire activation portfolio, using that dashboard to try and capture updates and identify or discuss potential barriers to activation. So the meetings include the CTO activation team, the study team and disease team manager, the regulatory team, pre-award finance, and OCRIC. And basically we have it every 2 weeks. We will have independent meetings for each disease group where we get all of those groups together and review their entire portfolio. It kind of helps us stay in line with knowing who might be working much faster than the other. Like if the IRB submission is ready to go, but we don't have a budget template, that's kind of a red flag that we know that the budget team needs some help, and the regulatory team might not have all of the budget information that they need. So it's a time that we can all get together and discuss that every 2 weeks and identify the plan moving forward if we do run into discrepancies like that. So just trying to keep each group in line with each other and increase that visibility so everybody knows what everyone else is doing. We also have creation of templates to share with study sponsors up front. So this is something kind of just operationally we have found success with. We have a site profile that we send them that kind of lists all of our procedures, links to our SOPs, contacts at our site, some of our pharmacy information, our facilities information, and partners that we can help, or we can ask for help for our clinical trials. So it's a large document that we send to a study sponsor, basically upon identifying interest in the study. So even before site selection by the study sponsor, we'll be sending them the site profile to review. We have a master EMR and source data verification form. We found that we get these sent to us by all study sponsors to complete. And instead of completing the study sponsors one, we just have a master one that we put the study information on and send back to them. And that's saved a lot of just a lot of time that we don't have to spend kind of reiterating what we already know on the sponsors form. So, and then, as I said, we send them links to our SOPs that they can review on their own. These templates help provide required information up front so that sponsors know what to expect during site activation, and we can start addressing any concerns proactively. And then the last thing for initiatives and future direction is just policy changes, including managing of amendments that are received during activation. So as you know, there are many amendments that are received throughout the life of a study, and activation is no exception there. So decisions on how to proceed with amendments, if we receive them during activation, depend on many factors, including the complexity and impact of the amendment itself and how early in the process it was received. So these discussions can be brought to the bi-monthly review meeting if needed. Often the timing kind of aligns that we can discuss it with everybody, and we'll find out how much work has been done on the budget already, or if the budget template for the amendment is even available yet. And then decisions would include either rolling this activation or rolling this amendment into activation, so just proceeding with a new protocol version. We can also proceed with activation under our current protocol version and then process an amendment once we're open. So if we, for example, if we receive an amendment after IRB approval and when we're trying to finalize the contract, at that point, instead of submitting an amendment and going and reworking everything, we'll just proceed with study activation how we are, open the study, and then we'll process an amendment. So that's through discussion with our own groups and discussion with the study sponsor to agree to that. But taking a firm stance there can really help lower activation timelines because amendments can be pretty disruptive to the process. So again, here just the caveat that the general stance of the CTO is that we will activate the study under the original protocol version that was received, and amendments will be processed after activation. So that's our general stance. Doesn't always work, but that's what we try for. Next slide. Pretty sure I'm done now. Yeah, so just acknowledgements. I wanted to acknowledge our CTO leadership, Aaron Lynch and Cindy Dwight, as well as Dr. Abedin, who's our medical director, and they are really involved in implementing these initiatives and supporting the mission of our activation team. And then the CTO activation team as well, who I could not do any of this without. I know some of them may be on the call. I saw some names, but Gabby Threat, Sarah Leonard, Margaret Marco, and Hannah Nessel. I don't think there's any other slides there. I think that was it. So I can pause.
Yeah. There is something in the chat. It's kind of long, so I'm wondering. Looks like there's a few asks of items, so I don't know if it might be something. I'll go ahead and read it all, but it might be something you want to follow up with Mike directly on. I would assume also that we might have other resources too, but Marcia said, thanks for asking and discussing the master agreement with sponsor question issue. I had advocated to MCW Office of Research Leaders 3 to 5 years ago to help us obtain more master agreements across MCW. We all work with many of the same sponsors. All the individual contract language negotiating we have to do is a big time waster and greatly slows down the startup. The question is there a list of sponsors and consortiums with which MCW has current master agreements that MCW Office of Research Contracts Office can share and post to the internal MCW website?
I don't have a list handy, but that's not a bad idea. I know that we are working on it with a number of sponsors. Now, it's not necessarily a fix-all for the process. One thing I did not touch on here is when a contract research organization or CRO is involved, that can complicate it, even if you have a master agreement with the sponsor. So it's not necessarily a fix-all, but for a lot of sponsors, it does help it go faster, or at least it eliminates some things that we don't have to negotiate. But yeah, to answer your question, I don't have that handy. I can follow up with our contracts team because I know that we work with some pharmaceutical sponsors who probably have other trials in other spaces within MCW. So
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for pointing out that the CRO can throw some wrinkles in there too.
yes, they certainly can. But that is something that we ask up front too, especially with companies that we've worked with before and know some of the negotiations that have happened in the past. We want to know if they're going to be working with a CRO because it's going to impact how we negotiate. So that's part of upfront, some of that information gathering before the study.
Yes,
Even
very good. Thanks.
post-acquisition. Thank you.
And there was also kind of like a sub question to that is, do you know who the current contacts are with the MCW contracts office, who we might be able to work with to obtain more master agreements?
I believe primarily we are working with Neil Fitzgerald.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marsha. All right. Well, I just have a couple more slides. Do we have any other questions for Mike? Or comments in general about the process?
I didn't put my email on these slides, but you guys can reach out if you have any questions or want to follow up individually. So it's just going to be mjacklin@MCW. I can throw it in the chat.
And then I just wanted to, with the last few minutes, just point to a few slides that we have included. Our lovely team over at Children's sent over a couple of informational slides. The first one, and there's a QR code to link to this, is the pre-submission checklist and guidance tool. So it's a tool for investigators that includes considerations and steps when assessing a feasibility prior to submitting the proposed research. So it states to use this tool, it will help to ensure an efficient and timely local context and IRB review process. This tool should not be included with the submission for the IRB approval, however. And then here is the CWHRPP email address. And then there's also a QR code, pardon me, for the research resource request form. So this is a REDCap form. So research staff will be able to fill out a REDCap survey to request support and approvals from various areas within Children's. And then administrators will receive the completed survey for review and approval. Once this is approved, the research team receives an approval notification that can be uploaded into eBridge for IRB approval. And then the last slide here are the Children's Wisconsin contacts, and all their email addresses are listed on here. And then finally, I just wanted to reiterate some of the upcoming trainings that we have. So our monthly session next month, it is September 25th. So that one is the Coordinator's Guide to Key Research Systems at MCW. And then in a couple of weeks, on Tuesday, September 9th, we have our clinicaltrials.gov training. This goes through laws and policies. It also walks through the registration as well as the results process. And this particular one is going to feature the modernized website. Both the registration section as well as the results section is all available in the modernized website. If you've had a hand in that, you might have seen the modernized version versus the classic. So this will be the latest and greatest of everything clinicaltrials.gov PRS. And then on September 16th, we have our in-person hands-on research consenting workshop. Anybody who hasn't taken it, I would highly recommend that. We do some small group activities where we revise snippets of consent forms. I really enjoy that workshop. And also, if you want to take it again, if you took it a couple of years ago, there might be some new, I believe, I want to say maybe 2 years ago. Time flies, but we've added things like remote and e-consent is in that agenda as well. So you can register on the Academy website there. And I want to thank you all for attending today's session. And thank you so much, Mike, for going through your process. It was very helpful and inspiring, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot more that I didn't discuss if anybody is involved in activation and wants to talk about it. feel free to reach out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Everyone have a great rest of your day.